What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you the top 7 best and most useful tips and tricks in Path of Exile 2. So moving over to my first tip, in which I will cover solo leveling versus group leveling and what are the fastest ways to level quickly. Leveling in Path of Exile 2 will demand careful planning and efficiency, especially as you approach higher levels. By using group play, leveraging efficient farming strategies, and continuously upgrading your gear, you can minimize the grind and reach level 100 much faster than if you were just attempting the journey alone. However, both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. So for example, if you choose to solo level, then you can level at your own pace without the reliance on others. You can also complete most activities without requiring to wait or coordinate with other players. And on top of that, you will get more loot per player while leveling. But the disadvantages are that you don't get any party XP bonuses, and high tier maps may be more challenging at the start for a solo player. And then on the other hand, for the group leveling, advantages are that you can do faster map clearing with an optimized team. You can also do rotations with friends or strangers, which reduces material cost. And you also gain XP bonuses in a party based on the number of members. And finally, you can spread out in the campaign zone to quickly complete the side objectives. But then for the downsides, you get that potential delay when waiting on others in the group. You also get less freedom to pursue your own goals at any time. And finally, your group progression can be affected by underlevel members. And my personal suggestions for the fastest leveling are to first of all prioritize on completing the campaign. Next, obtain all ascendancy skill points for your character. Then third, run maps repeatedly until you reach tier 16. Then fourth, add content like Abyss or Breach to the maps for higher mob density. Then fifth, clear every mob in your path during each map's rotation. And finally, the sixth, invest Atlas Tree points into the passives that will increase your XP gain. Then my second tip is to use your currency thoughtfully. Throughout your time in POE 2, you will find currency items that allow you to upgrade your gear. Orbs of Alchemy can be used to make normal items into rare with 4 modifiers, which can often be the difference between success and failure. Having a powerful weapon upgrade before a boss fight can have a huge impact on not only your build's performance but also on how much you're having fun. Currency in Path of Exile 2 has several functions, so crafting, trading, as well as possibly paying for certain services that you will find later in the game. Currency orbs are found as natural drops from the slang monsters, with bosses having a higher chance to drop more of a rare currency type. You can also disenchant items at certain vendors to gain currency shards, which will combine into a full orb when you have enough shards. While leveling and fighting certain bosses during the campaign, it will be guaranteed that you will get useful low-level currency, so make sure that you are doing optional side bosses too, or that extra loot which will become more useful in the endgame. And before you get into currencies, you will need to understand what each one does, so here is my quick summary. First, the Orb of Transmutation is primarily used in the initial stage of crafting, but can be used early during the campaign to upgrade normal items to the magic ones. Next, we have the Orb of Augmentation, which are used to add an additional modifier to a magic item, usually after using the Orb of Transmutation first. Third, the Orb of Alchemy is mainly used to have a chance to create a good rare item with at least 4 modifiers. Then next we have the Orb of Chance, which can provide an opportunity to land an upgrade for an item by transforming it into a magic item. Then fifth, the Chaos Orbs can be used as a gamble to massively improve an item. For example, if you have 2 good modifiers and 2 bad modifiers, then using a Chaos Orb has a chance to remove 1 bad modifier to replace it with a good one. Then sixth, the Regal Orb upgrades a magic item to a rare item with an additional modifier. They're more common than other currencies, so that makes them more useful. Then next we have the Orbs of Annulment, which are advanced crafting currency that are used to remove a random modifier from an item. Then next we have the Exalted Orb, that adds a random modifier to a rare item and is also much more common compared to other currencies. Then next we have the Divine Orb, which is an advanced currency that can be used to randomize the values on items to possibly improve them. Then 10th we have the Veil's Orb, which are reserved for the final step of a crafting process, as by using it we'll apply the corrupted tag to the item, which prevents any further changes from being made to it. Then next we have the Mirror of the Calandra, which creates a copy of another non-unique item. This currency is extremely rare, so I recommend to not use them but sell instead. And finally we have the Jeweler's Orb. This will add a socket to a skill gem with 2 sockets. Then my next step is that if you want to increase your character's damage, then you first need to understand what stat scaling does to your DPS, which scaling are tied to actions or monsters and etc. So in PoE 2 there are a number of known ways to scale damage, and these can be divided into 4 main categories. The first one is your DPS scaling, which is tied to the monster. An example is that the monster suffers more damage because it is shocked. Then second we have scaling that is tied to a player. An example is that a player allocates a specific node into the passive tree, which reads 29% increase to a chaos damage. Or perhaps you turn on the buff Archmage, which reads spells gain 5% of the damage as lightning damage for each 100% maximum mana you have. Then third we have the avoiding failed actions. An example is that you cast a spell, but monster's hit inflicts a stun while they are casting it, causing the spell to fail. Another player fires a projectile, but the intended target isn't in the right place when the projectile gets to it. So another player makes an attack, but has insufficient accuracy, and so the monster evades it. And finally we have increasing time spent attempting to deal damage. An example is that the player's high movement speed allows them to dodge a deadly boss attack rapidly and to get back to dealing damage. However, another player's investment into fire resistance and life leech allows them to stand in the fire consistently, attacking and never once stopping to move. So what we can take from all of these examples? In PoE 2, you will usually focus on one type of damage on many builds, to maximize the options for increased damage modifiers on the passive tree. Also, a spell that deals cold damage and gains a percentage of damage as the extra cold damage is easier to scale than mixing bunch of elements together. The same applies to weapons. This means that you cannot circumvent the need for good weapons and high-level spell gems simply by stacking the flat damage stats. Some skills don't need much damage, but can make the next skill you use do more damage, such as the breaking monster armor. So always ask yourself, is it worth firing one weak skill to empower several following ones? The answer is usually no against weak monsters, and yes otherwise, so make your build around this thought in mind. Next, let's take a look at what gear does on a basic level, and what type of stats should you look for when choosing what items to keep or disregard. In PoE 2, there are 10 gear slots, or 9 if you're using a two-handed weapon. Additionally, players can equip up to 5 flasks and allocate cluster or normal jewels into the passive skill tree to further enhance their character. Then furthermore, gear is also divided into several categories, including weapons, helmets, body armor, gloves, boots, and accessories like the necklaces, rings, and belts. So here's my very generalized rule of thumb that all classes and ascendancies can follow regarding the gear. So for body armor, gloves, and helmet, you want to look for defensive mods such as life, resistances, and increases to defensive modifiers such as evasion, armor, and energy shield. But attributes can also be useful. Then second we have the boots. For them, increased movement speed is the most desirable mod, as it is the easiest place to acquire this important stat. Increased movement speed will allow you to maneuver around the battlefield more quickly, and will also increase the speed of your dodge roll. Other useful mods include life, movement speed, resistances, and attributes. Then next we have rings, and they are an excellent source to gain a large amount of resistances and attributes, freeing up mod slots on other gear pieces for other stats you may want. Life is also desirable on the rings, but so are modifiers that fill in the gaps on your build, such as the accuracy rating, mana, damage to attacks, or attack and cast speed. Then as far as amulets go, they are another great source of attributes, resistances, and life, but also some more offensive modifiers such as critical strike chance, increased critical damage bonus, or mods that increase elemental damage to spells and attacks. Then also we have belts, which are often reserved for more defensive modifiers such as life and resistances. And finally for weapons, you want to aim for damage or other useful utility mods that improve your offensive capabilities. And finally for weapons, of course damage or other useful utility mods that improve your offensive capabilities are the main stats to look for. So for example, a witch could find a scepter that hugely increases her spirit, allowing her to summon a larger undead army, which directly improves her ability to take down enemies. Or then a warrior, on the other hand, would likely want a mace, with more traditional weapon mods that increase his physical damage. Then my next tip is that you need to utilize the dual specialization. So POE 2 has introduced a new core game mechanic, where unlike in other games where a player is limited to just one build or one playstyle, then now basically you get two different skill sets and loadouts to work with. The dual specialization system works in two main ways. First, a character will gain access to a limited number of special passive points. With these points, essentially you have two different passive trees. And second, skills can be set to either of your weapon loadout. Your character will automatically swap between your first or second weapon and use the skills set to it. The act of weapon swapping is automatic, and you only need to press your skill like normal. There is of course a small delay when switching weapons, so you may want to set some skills to both weapons if there's no difference. Just keep in mind that your character won't switch if the set is to both, but will only switch for other skills. I personally like to use it with my sorceress, as by using the dual specialization tree, I can allocate points to both lightning and cold damage, and as I weapon swap, the tree fitting my skill gem is automatically being used. Also, if you look at the bottom right, you can see the number 1 and 2 with a check mark. This allows you to set each skill to a particular weapon set. All characters are able to utilize this dual specialization system, and you can use it in a variety of ways as well. You can use the system to simply buff your character, create different undead armies with your witch, or perhaps just swap between single and AoE setups. Then for my next step, let's take a look at the skill gems, and where and when should you spend them. So Path of Exile's 2 skill system is different from what you might be used to. Unlike other ARPGs, skills in PoE 2 are items which can be socketed into your skill gem page, which means that these skills are not limited to class, so all classes can use any skill. Overall we have 5 gem types, and we will quickly cover each one, and then at the end I will explain the best utilization for them. So first we have the active skill gems. Active skill gems, or just skill gems, give you access to various attacks that are ranged, melee, just normal spells or summoning skills. You can find these throughout the campaign in the form of an uncut skill gem, which can be then engraved to select a skill of your choice. In PoE 2, all classes have access to 9 active skill gem sockets, which can be then used as you please. Skill gems can also be further modified by support gems, which I will cover in just a second. So then second we have the support gems, and they can modify or enhance your skill gems, but don't provide new abilities themselves. These gems must be socketed into sockets alongside the skill gem to function. In PoE 2, each character starts with 2 sockets besides each skill gem socket, and this can be extended up to 5 support sockets per skill through the use of the Jeweler's Orbs, which you will find throughout your adventure. For example, you might use a Fireball skill and then find a support such as the multiple projectiles. If you link this with your Fireball, then your Fireballs will shoot out an extra 2 Fireballs per cast, with the downside being that each one will do slightly less damage. You could also link this with the Pierce support, meaning that your 3 Fireballs now will fly through enemies, allowing them to hit even more. Then third we have the buff gems. This is a special type of gem that grants persistent buffs or temporary buffs to your character, nearby allies and or minions. These buffs stay active until manually turned off, and reserve spirit to keep active. Persistent buffs are skills that increase your damage, defenses, or have other useful effects. An example is the Arctic Armor, which summons an icy barrier around you that gains stages over time that absorb incoming hits that deal fire or physical damage. Or then the temporary buffs provide a short-term, powerful effect but require activation, often on a cooldown. Next we have the uncut gems. These are the gems that will give you a choice of which gem you want. They can also be used to increase the level of your active skill gems. By clicking this uncut gem, it will take you to the engraving window, where you have a choice of a gem based on the level of the uncut gem. The choices that are offered are often limited and linked to your character's class, making the choice more simpler for newer players. And finally we have the meta gems. These are more complex gems that trigger an effect when certain conditions are met. The meta gems reserve spirit and make use of an energy mechanic, where meeting a condition generates energy, and reaching maximum energy triggers the effect. An example is the cast on a shock, so you will gain 20 energy when you shock an enemy, with a hit from a skill once per skill use. So now in my conclusion, mastering the skill gem system can seem overwhelming at first, but once you understand how to match the skill gems with the right support gems, and how buff and meta gems can further enhance your character, then you will unlock countless of build possibilities. And now finally, let me show you the best tips and tricks for the passive skill tree. As for most players, this can seem extremely daunting. So to start off, one important concept to understand is the attributes. In Path of Exile 2, we have Strength, which are red, Dexterity, which are green, and Intelligence, that are blue. These attributes generally align with the certain types of skills, so Strength for more heavy hitting melee attacks, then Dexterity for faster forms of ranged combat, and then finally Intelligence for more spell-based or summoning style skills. So now let's take a look at the passive skill tree. A character is granted one passive skill point every time they level up, and sometimes they are even granted more from completing certain quests. And don't worry, because you can change these points around by spending gold at the Hooded One, or with the Orbs of Regret, but respecting your points is not cheap, so I recommend to follow one of my build guides for the most efficient setup. But with that said, here we have the attribute areas. This is just a rough overview of how the passive tree is segmented by passive and attribute type. In extremely simple terms, at the top we have the intelligence section, which focuses on spell damage, summoning and elemental damage. Then we have the bottom right, which is dexterity section, and it's more focused on ranged combat, evasion and speed. And then finally we have the bottom left, which is the strength section, and this is more melee and defense oriented. Then next we have the passive nodes, and they're split into two categories. The small passives, aka the blue squares, are the small points that grant minor bonuses, such as small increases to attack speed, spell damage, melee damage or attributes. And then second we have notable passives, aka the red squares. These are slightly larger passive points that grant greater bonuses than the small passives, but they have stats on them that are often closely related to the small passives leading up to them. So think of these as the checkpoints to work towards. And then on top of this, we have the third passive point, which is not entirely compared to the blue and red squares. So the third point are the keystones, that are build changing, character defining points that often provide a massive amount of power, but with a downside. These downsides can be reduced or worked around, but keystones are the core of your character building in PoE 2. So for example, we have the Giant's Blood keystone. It reads that you can wield a two-handed melee weapon in just one hand, but weapon requirements are doubled. So now that you know what a keystone is, what's the next step? Well, let's say that you're level 20. You've taken a few good notable passive points, then now your next step should be to look at any nearby keystone, to see if any might be good for you. If you're a ranger with tons of accuracy already, who doesn't care about critical strikes, then heading over to the precise technique might be the best damage boost that you're looking for. Usually my train of process is to find out the keystone that I want to get first. Then second, look for the best path to reach the keystone, and what good notable passives are along the way. And then finally, where I should go after getting those points. Although bear in mind that you don't have to take any keystones if none fit your build, and most builds often don't take more than a couple of keystones. But by using keystones and notable points as checkpoints, or just the guiding lights, will make the otherwise overwhelming passive tree a bit more digestible. So, if you enjoyed this video, click like, subscribe and comment. If you're interested in more content, then check out my channel and I will see you in the next one. So take it easy, peace.